Today I'm going to show you how to do the drop stitch eyelets in block D. I'm up to row 31, so we'll work across that row now. The instructions are knit 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is where we place the eyelet. So we knit into the front of the second stitch on the left hand needle and leave those 2 stitches there. We then work a yarn forward. So we take our yarn around the needle, so between the needles, and back over the right needle into the knitting position. Then we knit into the front leg of the first stitch on the left hand needle. Once we've done that, we can pull those 2 stitches off, and we've increased our stitch count by 1 with that yarn forward in the middle. If we now place a stitch marker on our needle, it helps when we work the wrong side rows. These 3 stitches are worked as purl stitches on the wrong side, and it's a bit hard to see where you are in the pattern, so a stitch marker helps there. Now we knit 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So again, we knit into the front of the second stitch on the left hand needle. We do a yarn forward, and then we knit into the front of the first stitch, taking all the stitches off the needle. Place another stitch marker and continue working across the row. I quite like these stitch markers. You might prefer just the little circle ones, just whatever your preference is. You may not even want to put stitch markers. You might be happy to count the stitches in your head on the wrong side rows. I'll let you finish that row and we'll come back and I'll show you how to work the wrong side row. So now I'm up to the 32nd row. I've got my eyelets marked with the stitch markers, and as you can see, it is pretty hard to tell where you're up to in the pattern. So we'll work back across those stitches now, and I'll just show you how to work them. The yarn I'm using today is the lovely Mulberry and Flax Merino Singles, the Great Southern Yarn. So this is their fingering weight yarn, and the colour is Margaret Ollie. So knit 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, slip the marker. So now we need to do purl 1 TBL. So that's through the back loop. So you come at it from the left hand side of the stitch, like so. Purl that stitch. We're just going to purl the center stitch, the yarn forward. We don't need to twist that one. And then we're going to purl 1 TBL. And that's your 3 eyelet stitches. By working the purl 1 TBL and the knit 1 TBL on the next row, it just defines those stitches a little bit more around the eyelet. We don't have to worry about doing it to the center stitches. We're going to drop that down later on. So we knit 12, and the stitch marker alerts us to the fact that now we've got to purl some stitches. So we have purl 1 through the back loop, purl one, purl another one through the back loop, and then knit across your row as for the 32nd row. So here's my scarf with the 32nd row completed. I'm just going to put in a marker up here to mark another 10 rows worked. It just makes it much easier to work out where I am in the pattern. You don't have to mark them up the whole way. You can, you can move these up after you've marked a couple of rows of 10. So if you want to count, we've got 10, 20, then we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, another 10. So that's the 30th row there. And as you can see, we've worked another ridge. So we've worked 2 more rows. We're now up to the 33rd row. So what happens now in the pattern is you need to work row 33, which is knit 6, knit 1 TBL, knit 1 TBL across the 3 stitches that make up the eyelet, and then you'll repeat rows 32 and 33 another 3 times, then row 32 once more. So I'll let you finish those rows and I'll come back and work row 41 with you and show you how to complete the eyelet. So here's my scarf. I've just completed the 40th row, and we can use our little markers here to just check. So we've got 10, 20, 30, then if we count the ridges, we've got 32, 34, 36, 38, 40 rows completed. So now I'm up to row 41, which is when we close the eyelets and allow the center stitch, which was the yarn forward that we made previously, ladder down to form these little openings. So I'll show you what we do. So we have knit 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a bit like we did at the start, we knit into the front of the 3rd stitch on our left hand needle, and just make sure that when you do that, that you just go into the 3rd stitch. Sometimes you can catch that 2nd stitch, and if you do, it won't ladder down. So knit the 3rd stitch, but leave it on the needle, then knit into the front of the 1st stitch. Take them all off the needle, and what will happen with the yarn forward is that it will ladder down because we haven't worked it. I'll come back and show you that in a moment. So we can take the stitch holder, stitch marker off. So if we work across to our next eyelet, and you can see how by working the TBLs it really defines the stitches. So here we go, we knit into the front of the 3rd stitch. Just make sure you haven't caught the middle stitch. Then into the 1st stitch. So the middle stitch, which was the yarn forward we made, is left unworked. We take them all off the needle, and what happens is that stitch ladders down. And what you might need to do if you have a yarn with a little bit of hair like I have here is just help it ladder down. So I've just got my You can either do it with your knitting needle, or if you've got a sewing needle, you can just work it down like that. Just depending on the yarn. And that's it, completely laddered. I'll show you once more. So we can remove the stitch marker. So work across to the last eyelet. Then we knit into the front of the third stitch, knit into the front of the first stitch and take them all off. Remove that stitch marker and we'll knit to the end. I'm working a slipped stitch along my scarf, so all I need to do is bring my yarn to the front and slip that purlways. So if we just have another little look at this one, we can just use our knitting needle to help it ladder down like so. It's probably a bit easier with a knitting needle. And if you've got a slippery yarn, it'll ladder down much easier than this. And that's it. And we'll do this one the same. So just need to tease it a little bit. Unhook it if it's caught. And that's it. And that's just an effective little detail to your scarf or shawl. And if you block it out a little bit, it'll just help open up those eyelets as well. So now you have some garter stitch rows in between before you work your next row of eyelets. And as I said, just mark every 10 rows and it will be much easier to count.